Today I'd like to do a dedicated video on backup cooking stoves for emergency purposes such as power outages. Over the past few months we've gone through a few different storms, and I normally check in with my family members and friends before those storms actually arrive to check to see how their preps are doing. And one of the first questions I'll ask is, how are you going to prepare your food? How are you going to cook food, boil water, things like that? Oftentimes people don't have anything planned for when they don't have power as far as how they're going to boil water or cook food. So for this particular video I'd like to cover several different options that I would recommend for any person to have in their emergency supplies for cooking. So let's get started with this video now, featuring backup stoves for emergency purposes. In this video, we're going to cover several different options for alternative stoves, ranging from small, so something that you could put in an emergency bucket kit, and just going up in size from there. All of it is going to be designed to be fairly inexpensive, so it's not going to kill your budget to have these, and you could also use them for non-emergency purposes, such as a barbecue. My first recommendation, if you don't already have one, is to pick yourself up a new outdoor grill for your next barbecue. That's right, go barbecue grill shopping. It's the easiest and possibly the most practical backup stove to use during a power outage, and it's one that you actually will most likely practice with regularly. If your significant other gets mad when you purchase your new grill, just tell them that it's for emergency purposes. Next, you're going to want to pick up a 20-pound propane tank for your new grill. This is the most common size. You could go with the refillable tanks that you could pick up at Home Depot, Lowe's, or other hardware stores, but I'd actually recommend owning your own propane tank, one that's a little bit more higher rated. I would recommend the Worthington brand for the 20-pound steel propane cylinders. They also come in 30-pound and on up with regard to size. These ones are highly rated, much more highly rated than the refillable tanks over at Home Depot and Lowe's, and you're just going to have to refill them at gas stations, for example. I recommend following the rule of 3 when it comes to propane tanks. Again, 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is for me. So for the rule of 3, you're going to have 1 for your barbecue that you're going to use on a regular basis, for example, during the summer. You're going to have an additional one for a backup just in case you run out during a barbecue. And then that third one's going to be for your long-term preps. And the rule of 3 is applicable in a lot of different scenarios. Now that you have your outdoor grill and fuel, you'll probably be good for the majority of situations that you would run into for a standard power outage. If we're talking more long-term, then you're probably going to want to conserve your fuel and maybe use a smaller stove. And there's a lot of different options we could go from there. I personally have several different options for smaller stoves that could be used in a power outage or other emergency situation. Most of them are already stored somewhere, like in an emergency kit that I might have. They're run on various fuel sources. Some are gas stoves that are commonly used for backpacking, camping, things like that. I also have wood-burning stoves and ones that run on denatured alcohol. But if you don't really consider yourself a prepper and want to just have a basic stove that you could store in your home for an emergency purpose, I would probably recommend going with a smaller gas stove. When it comes to gas stoves, you're going to want to decide whether to go with propane, like you did your outdoor grill, or butane. I say, why not both? There's a lot of different options out there right now for gas power stoves that run on propane or butane fuel, and they're all fairly affordable. It's not that big of a deal to pick up one of each, and then you have a lot of different options in an emergency purpose with regard to what fuel to use. So I prefer going with name brand stoves such as Coleman versus a knockoff type brand. That's just my personal preference, and I think you're going to have an easier time finding propane than you will butane. The next stove that I recommend picking up is the Coleman Classic Propane Stove, which costs around $40 just about anywhere. I've owned several variations of this particular stove over the years. Again, I prefer the Coleman brand for its price versus quality. This one is great to use for various barbecue trips, whether it be at the park, at the beach, at camping. It folds fairly flat. You could store it just about anywhere, like in your garage, out in the shed, store it in your car when you're going on your outdoor adventures. It's a really, really good stove. You're going to want to pick up several of the smaller propane canisters to use with your Coleman Classic Propane Stove. They usually cost around $3 each at almost any store, and I would recommend picking up 12 of them. Now, I recommend actually using one of those small propane canisters each month throughout the calendar year. So do a random barbecue. Go out camping, go to the beach, go to the park, grill up some hot dogs, and use one of those smaller propane canisters that month. As you use them, replace them with new propane canisters. That'll ensure that you always have a fresh supply of the smaller propane canisters that are portable, and it actually encourages you to actually go out and use the gear that you have. Next, I would recommend picking up a high-pressure propane hose and adapter. I'd actually probably recommend picking up 2 of them. The one that I like is the Coleman 5-foot high-pressure propane hose and adapter. It costs around $10. So if you're going to pick up two, it's going to cost around $20. And here's where that rule of three applies again. So you're already going to have a hose that came with the barbecue grill that you just purchased. Then you're going to have two additional ones. So you could use one of them for yourself and then the other one for a backup or even for trade. So during a power outage, when you may be wanting to conserve your fuel, you could use the adapter hose to connect your Coleman Classic propane stove, which is much smaller than your outdoor grill, to your 20-pound propane tank for extended use. So those smaller propane canisters might last a night, might last a weekend. The larger 20-pound propane tanks, when connected to your Coleman Classic propane stove, when you're really trying to conserve fuel, can last for an extended period of time. Now let's move over to a butane stove option. I would recommend, again made by Coleman, the Coleman Butane Instastart stove. This one costs less than $20 and it's a really, really nice portable stove that you could store just about anywhere. You could store it in your kitchen, you could store it in the garage, take it on camping trips, you name it. This one is very commonly used by chefs when they're cooking outdoors. If you watch shows like Top Chef, oftentimes you'll see them using one of these smaller butane Instastart style stoves. And this one is just a really nice one. You could pick it up almost anywhere. Again, we're going to need some fuel, so I'd recommend, again, picking up 12 of the smaller butane canisters to use with the Coleman Butane Instastart stove. These ones are harder to find locally. I have better luck finding them online. For example, you could pick up 12 of the GasOne brand of the butane fuel canisters for around $25. As we did before, I would recommend using one of the butane fuel canisters each month throughout the calendar year with your Coleman Butane Instastart stove. This will not only give you practice with the stove and encourage you to go to outdoor events, but it'll also ensure that you have a fresh supply of butane fuel canisters that you could count on if an emergency purpose ever occurred. Now let's go with a few different stove options that are smaller in size. For example, they could fit in that 5-gallon emergency bucket kit that we covered in a previous video. So I'll give one option that's very small, the other one that's a little bit larger. Again, these are more intended to be used for people that probably don't consider themselves to be preppers. Most preppers probably have various cooking methods already in place where they're making their own kindling and things like that. I'm thinking more along the lines of someone like my mom who's not a prepper and just wants something very simple that works. The first option is again made by Coleman. I'm starting to feel like I'm marketing for Coleman, even though I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. I just happen to like their stoves. So the option is the Coleman Bottle Top Propane Stove. It costs around $22, and this is a very small option that you could easily store just about anywhere. It could fit in the 5-gallon emergency bucket kit, but it'll probably take up a fair amount of space. And again, we're able to reuse those smaller propane canisters that we covered in the previous segment regarding the Coleman Classic propane stove. This is a very good option. You're going to want to make sure that you have that base secured to it because it's a little top heavy and you don't want to tip over boiling water on yourself. But when you use the base, it's pretty sturdy. A much smaller alternative that you could go with is the MSR Pocket Rocket knockoff version. You could pick it up online. The one that I have is the Etekcity Ultralight Portable Outdoor Backpacking Camping Stove. Cost around $11. It's actually gone up in price over the years. And again, this one's a knockoff of the MSR Pocket Rocket, which costs between $30 and $40 at this point. So you're going to want to make sure that you test this one just to make sure it's not a lemon. I haven't run into any problems with the ones that I've included in various kits with mine, but you never know when you're buying like made in China stoves. So they're not as nice as the name brand, but they could get the job done. They're affordable and very small. So this is something that you could include in that 5-gallon emergency bucket kit, and you're going to want to combine it with the butane fuel canister that you could pick up at REI, for example, the ones made by MSR, Snow Peak. They cost around $4 to $5, and just pair that with the knockoff Pocket Rocket for an ultra small stove to use for emergency purposes. At this point of the video, we have a decent amount of fuel stored up. If we follow the rule of 3, we would have 3 of the 20-pound propane canisters. You could also go with the 30-pound version or even larger. We would have a dozen of the smaller propane canisters. We'd have a dozen of the butane fuel canisters, and we could also use those larger 20-pound propane canisters with our smaller stoves using that high-pressure hose and adapter. We've also set up multiple camping and barbecue trips throughout the year with the idea of rotating and restocking your smaller fuel supply. At this point, we have a lot of variation and flexibility with our gas-powered stoves. We could even accessorize if we wanted to. For example, with that Coleman Classic propane 2-burner stove, you could pick up a stove carry case that costs around $20 or so. It even has 2 side pockets for the smaller propane canisters to make it even easier to go out on your random barbecue trips. It could technically also be used in a bug-out scenario where you're bugging out to your vehicle to go to an alternative location. It's a quick grab and go where you'll have your stove and a couple different fuel canisters. That's going to do it for this video featuring backup cooking stoves for power outages. I provided a lot of information in the description box below that you could check out regarding all the items that you've seen in this video. Please leave your comments below in the comment section regarding this video topic. Maybe you have some recommendations on items that you would recommend for people to store in their home for emergency purposes like a power outage. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video featuring cooking stoves for power outages and other emergencies. See you guys next time.